with central banks. In Australia, the stock of mortgages is expanding at a slower pace than occurred during the adjustment to financial liberalisation and the low inflation environment. A related development is that housing turnover remains well below its peak in the early 2000s, which has contributed to a decline in prepayment rates. The corollary of this is that a lower level of RMBS issuance is required to fund a given share of Australian mortgages. In fact, the share of mortgages funded by securitisation has been more or less stable during the past year at around 8%. Alongside these slow-moving forces that are exerting themselves on the RMBS market, the global regulatory reform agenda is also playing its part. As the Reserve Bank has noted on more than one occasion, the ongoing effort to improve the regulation of the financial system amid a reassessment of funding and liquidity risk by banks and investors has the potential to affect the demand and supply of secured assets in a number of ways, and the net result of these interactions is actually quite difficult to pin down. But to take one example, the Basel III liquidity standard might, all else equal, be expected to raise the demand for repo-eligible securities, including highly rated RMBS. However, it's difficult to disentangle the effects of this reform from the reassessment of liquidity needs by banks and investors. The approach taken by APRA and the RBA in the implementation of this reform has been designed to have minimal disruption to the balance of supply and demand in securities markets. This extends to the classification of eligible securities for the bank's committed liquidity facility, as well as the various prices and haircuts that will be applied to eligible securities. I couldn't let this opportunity pass without saying something about the bank's securitisations reporting initiative, which was announced at last year's conference. As has been stated previously, the bank's primary motivation for collecting more information on asset-backed securities, such as RMBS, is to better assess the risk of these assets as they have the potential to appear on the bank's balance sheet. In fact, around 20 billion of these securities will appear on the bank's balance sheet later this month, as banks hold much higher cash balances with the RBA to cover settlement exchanges that occur after the close of the cash market each day. And in fact, today was the start of the lodgement period for those securities. So in tomorrow's dealing intentions, you'll be able to see how much self-securitized has actually been lodged with the RBA. From the 1st of January 2015, roughly 300 billion of these securities could potentially appear on the bank's balance sheet with the introduction of the committed liquidity facility. Given this very large potential exposure, the bank has a responsibility to ensure that that risk is actually well managed. The data that the bank receives will allow it to refine its pricing where there are large geographic or borrower-type concentration in loan pools, for example, and will use that discretion. And details of the cash flows associated with each security will provide greater transparency to the liability side of each transaction. This information will be particularly important for pricing self-securitisations, for which there are no market prices. The bank, that's actually our primary motivation, but we've also been motivated by our interest in promoting transparency in asset-backed markets as well. And this really recognises the inefficiencies associated with investors other market participants and regulators not having access to relevant, reliable and standardised information in order to better understand and monitor risk. Regulatory reform will also result in increased demand for quality collateral. To this end, the bank has made it a requirement that certain information be made publicly available if securities are to be eligible for the bank's open market operations. In designing the templates, the bank has been mindful of the need to balance concerns about privacy with investors' need to have enough information available to make a well-informed investment decision. To address these concerns about privacy, information providers will not report names and addresses and will replace actual loan and borrower ID numbers with dummy identifiers. In its latest round of consultation, which closed at the end of October, the bank has also proposed that loan level data not be provided publicly at the postcode level. Property location will be identified in the loan template by an ABS statistically defined area, while a separate pool level postcode summary of key variables in the loan template would be made publicly available. Certain dates will also be reported in calendar quarters rather than exact dates. The intention here is to limit the ability to derive property transaction data which will hinder borrower identification. In addition, users of the data will be limited to those with a legitimate purpose, such as potential investors and researchers. And these users will need to register with the information provider to access the data and enter into a binding agreement that limits the purpose for which the data may be used to an appropriate purpose. Under this agreement, users should not be able to match or attempt to match the data against other information in order to identify an individual. The final consultation period to determine the reporting templates is now closed. Once the bank has considered the submissions and reported back to industry, which we hope to occur by the end of this month, we will move into the implementation phase. This is a large project for both issuers and the bank. There are currently around 420 RBA eligible asset-backed securities, and each issuer will have to bring together information from varied data sources. We recognise as well that the deadline is actually very tight. Cognizant of this, the bank has gone to tender for the external system which will support the new reporting requirements. And once this is finalised, we will make available its technical requirements and give some sense of the relative importance of the various pieces of information as early as is practicable. In that way, you can focus your resources on the things that matter most to us. Communications relating to this will be via the bank's website. So on the rba.gov.au website, if you type in securitisations in the search field, it will take you to the homepage for the project. This will be the official source of information and testing and implementation coordination for the new reporting requirements. For example, a worked hypothetical example of the cash flow waterfall, which will provide the industry with a concrete implementation of this reporting template, will be posted on this site shortly. And I would strongly encourage people to visit the site and register for the RSS feed to receive alerts. The bank is also seeking progress reports from information providers every 2 months. Once again, I would strongly encourage information providers to complete these reports. These will give the bank a good understanding of industry readiness and help us assist industry in its preparations. In conclusion, the securitisation market continues to recover. And 2 years on, it's clear that covered bonds are a useful funding tool for Australian banks, enabling them to diversify their investor base and extend the tenor of their issuance. These instruments will continue to provide banks with access to a wholesale funding source that is less sensitive to global risk events than unsecured funding. As for increased transparency in the securitisation market, I don't get the sense that the bank is actually pushing against the tide. It's already happening in other jurisdictions, and in my discussions with issuers and investors, it's clear that they both see potential benefits. As a result, I take some comfort in the fact that this is a collective endeavour. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Chris. We do have the chance just for a couple of our quick questions. If anyone's got any pressing questions, we'll take them from the floor, and we've got a couple of microphones passing around. So if you do have a pressing question for Chris, just raise your hand and we'll get a microphone out to you. Otherwise, we might just move on to the next panel discussion. How about we just move to the next panel discussion? Thanks, Chris.
Okay.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Chris. That keeps us on time. Well, we all know that offshore investor interest has gone from strength to strength, but exactly to what degree? And that's the premise of our next session this afternoon and our final session for today. Moderating the panel will be Kevin Degnan, Global Head of Structured Finance at Fitch Ratings. I'll get him to replace me at the lectern right now. And he'll be joined by Henry Cook, Investor Management at Threadneedle Asset Management, Francisco Paez, Head of CMBS International Structured Finance and ABS CMBS Trading at MetLife, Aaron Sharma, Head of European ABS at Barclays, and Michael Rose, Director ABS Portfolio Management, Standard Chartered. Kevin, I'll leave it with you.
Thank you very much. Okay, lapel mic is working. Got my remote. Panelists are seated. All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kevin Degnan. I am the Global Head of Structured Finance and Covered